The tabletop takeaway.
Game mechanics on display.
Three designers share the stage.
Pick a genre and we'll play.
The tabletop takeaway.
Welcome back to the Tabletop Takeaway. I'm Ananda Gunaratna.
I'm Charlie McCarran.
And I'm Trevor Muller-Hagel.
And today we're going to talk about Catan, Cities and Knights, our first entry in our newest series. More on that in a moment, but let's talk about Cities and Knights first. Cities and Knights is the expansion to the base game of Catan, and certainly we're going to talk about Catan too, but in my opinion, Cities and Knights is the best version of Catan, which is why I wanted to do that one. So you're probably familiar with Catan, but in case you aren't, Catan is a game where you are settling an island. And so the game consists of gathering resources and using them to build settlements and cities, which let you gather even more resources. You build roads across the island to get to new places to build things. And you buy development cards, which give you various abilities. Now, Cities and Knights changes things up a little bit and adds a few more things. So the development cards in the base game of Catan are removed. They are split up into two different things, one of which is progress cards, which are like development cards, but there's more different types of them, and they have all sorts of effects that you can activate by playing them. And the other thing is knight tokens. So in Cities and Knights, in Catan, there's a card called the Knight, which makes up over half of the cards in the development deck.
It's so much.
Yeah. And in Cities and Knights, this is replaced with knight tokens that you can buy and physically place on the board.
Almost like worker placement, but not really worker placement at all.
Yeah, I mean, the original knight allowed you to drive away the robber. Mm-hmm. So in Catan, you get resources from hexes. So each hex has a number on it, and at the start of your turn, you roll 2 dice. And all of the hexes with the number matching the sum will produce whatever resources on that hex for any players that have cities or settlements next to the hex. And the robber is a piece that goes on a hex and blocks it from producing. So in the original Catan, you would use knight cards to drive away the robber, but in Cities and Knights, you have little knight tokens which can drive away the robber, so it fills the same role. And the other thing is Cities and Knights also introduces barbarians, which come and attack the island, and players can use their knights to defend the island, which gives whoever defended it the most, contributed the most knights, an extra point. But if the players don't repel the barbarians because they don't contribute enough knights, the players who contributed the least will lose a city, which is bad.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I've let's see, and then
commodities.
Right. Yes. So the really cool thing in Cities and Knights is players now have these flip charts, which are like their progress track, and you can gain commodities from your cities when their production is rolled, and you can use these commodities to upgrade your progress on the progress track. And the higher you are on the track, the more likely you are to be able to draw progress cards when certain things are rolled on the dice. So as you progress up the track, you get more and more progress cards from 3 different categories.
Which is much more interesting to me than having to pay like your resources for the development cards.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And this sort of maybe brings us to what the genre is that we're talking about, because Catan is the first game we're going to talk about in a series that I call probability farming. And the basic idea of probability farming is it's a little bit like engine building, except your engine gives you stuff at random, and it gives you stuff during other people's turns. So like you're sitting around waiting for other people to take their turn, they roll the dice, and you get stuff from that die roll. And the reason that I feel this deserves its own category is because this is actually really fun.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like, yeah.
And there aren't too many games like it, really.
Yeah, we actually had a hard time finding a good set of 3 to do for this series.
Yeah. And we joked about doing Monopoly because it really
The
maybe
original.
is one of the original where you get stuff based on what your opponent rolls.
Yep, if they land in your hotel and they suddenly have to pay all their money
Yeah.
to you, and then they go bankrupt and lose the game. It's great. It's a great game. Family fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not doing Monopoly spoilers.
doing
that's
Monopoly.
that's not one of.
It's
that's
not one of the 3. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Keep listening, please.
But yeah, Catan is a pretty classic example of this. You build your settlements and cities on the board, people roll dice, and you collect resources based on the tiles your settlements and cities are next to.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the first cases where in the rule book they tell you what the dice odds are of 2 dice.
Oh, yeah. Even on the tokens themselves, they show
Yeah.
you how many there are out of 36.
Yep.
Which is a neat little thing to have.
Yeah. And I used it when I was teaching game design because, like not everyone thinks about what are the probabilities of 2 dice.
Right.
And that's the whole thing that makes it interesting.
Yeah.
Like if it was just a 1d12 die, that's totally flat.
Really
Right.
exciting, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fact that different numbers have different likelihoods of being rolled really makes it feel like some hexes are more productive than others, right? You really want to be next to those 6s and 8s because they're going to give you a lot of stuff. And the 2s and 12s, you're less excited about.
Unless I'm rolling, then you're going to get 12s all the time.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, weirdly enough.
Yep.
But circling back for a moment to the development cards, talking about how the progress cards feel more compelling.
Yeah.
I think a big part of that is that with development cards, you pay the resources up front, and then you get something random. And if you were looking for a knight, then maybe you get what you want. But if you were looking for anything else, you probably don't get it. So it can be a bit disappointing because you tried to, you paid the stuff, but then you failed. Or got something you didn't want. But with the progress cards, you pay to increase the odds of getting them, and then the game gives them to you at random.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like a waste because it feels like you're getting something
For free.
Right. Yes. Yeah. You didn't pay for that specific progress card, so even if it's something that doesn't seem terribly useful, that's all right because you got it for free.
Because of your investment strategy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that might be my takeaway a little bit early here, but the commodities, how those work, because you kind of get this secondary resource of the advanced version, kind of like paper, wool, and coins for different areas, just from the cities. And those commodity cards are kind of interesting to me because at one point I was like, well, what else can we use these for? Oh, no, you just collect them and upgrade. There's like no other thing you do other than trading with people, possibly.
And it counts toward your hand limit, too. So, like, do I get rid of the stone if I want to build a city, or do
Yeah.
I hold on to the coin so I can upgrade that later?
Yeah. But yeah, what was interesting to me about it is like it's sort of a one-dimensional thing, which I try to not do in my games, but it actually helped me just make quick decisions about like, oh,
Right.
well, I have this thing and I just use it and spend it on this one thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not so much about what you use it on as how do you get enough commodities to buy the upgrades. Because the further you go on any particular progress track or progress flip chart, the more expensive the next upgrade is and the harder it is to get the commodities you need to upgrade to the next level. And the later levels of the flip track they're pretty good because once you get to the third level of any of the 3 tracks, you get a special ability. So there's the aqueduct, which lets you get resources when you don't get resources due to a roll.
Amazing.
Yeah, there's the I forget what the trade track one is called, but it lets you trade any commodity at a 2-for-1 rate, which is another way that you can use commodities.
So good.
And then there's the politics track. Commerce. Commerce is the name of the yellow one.
Oh, sure.
The politics track, where you gain the ability to build level 3 knights, which are so that there's 3 different levels of knights, and you can only access the third level once you have the third level of progress in the politics track, which is deceptively useful because you can beating the barbarians can give you a lot of points if you can be the one to contribute the most knights.
So I did really enjoy it, but just like thinking about the original Catan, it would be maybe a lot to throw this at someone who's never played original Catan. And I do wonder, because I remember hearing that Klaus Teuber had a lot of these ideas in his original pitch to the publisher, and they probably like cut all of these things out that were really cool, but like I
strip it down to its core.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
base Catan is sort of the base game, and this feels like, I don't know, to me it feels like Catan the way it should be played. I guess.
Well, it was definitely a fun moment when the balance between, okay, I was kind of being I knew I couldn't win the knight race because Ananda was in first, Trevor was in second, close second.
And then suddenly tied with Ananda.
Yeah, and then the tension of like, well, I could build another city, but because I don't have knights to defend it from the barbarians, I might just lose that city.
You're so really relying on us to pretend.
Yeah, so it was kind of like wheeling and dealing a little bit with you guys. Like, I know you want to help defend my city here.
Yeah. The whole barbarian mechanic, I've seen it in a couple of other games. Like, for example, a Game of Thrones, the board game, has the wildling track. Mm-hmm. And I think, what's that other one? Lowlands? The one with the sheep? But anyway, these sort of shared challenges are pretty interesting because in a competitive game, it does kind of bring people together.
Right.
Like, it has a carrot and a stick, right? If you beat the barbarians and you contribute the most knights, you're going to get a point, which you really want, because it's a permanent victory point. It can't be taken away from you. It's really good. And on the other hand, if you don't beat the barbarians but you still contribute the most knights, you're not going to lose any cities. So everybody wants to contribute to this shared challenge. It's not really a tragedy of the commons type thing, but it does make people feel like they're part of a community, right? Like, sure, you're fighting for control of the island, but you're still all together against the outsiders, right? The barbarian invaders.
I like that in a competitive game.
It also encourages cooperation in a competitive game, which is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, I guess when I was doing it, I was kind of. I felt like I was competing, but I was also competing in like a community spirit friendly way.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry, I will defend this island.
Yeah.
I will be your defenders.
Yep.
Yes.
Actual quote.
I think it's a really cool dynamic, and I think it could probably fit into a bunch of games if you want a way to get people to feel like they're cooperating with each other, even if for the other parts of the game they're competing. Like, I think it's always good to have things in games where people can cooperate with each other or feel like they're cooperating with each other.
Yeah, for sure.
One thing I'm curious about with the design of Catan, it is a little bit of a snowball type game.
It can be.
I'm trying to think if there's any catch-up mechanics.
Trading.
Trading.
Trading is tough though, because if you're not getting the rolls, if your areas aren't hitting and people don't trade with you, so you have to find the trade port and build a settlement.
You mean among players?
Among players. Players should absolutely be trading with each other and not trading with the leader. Like, trading is beneficial for both parties that do it, assuming they're making reasonable offers to each other. But
why are you looking at me?
That was definitely some side eye there for a second.
So like, I think the main balancing mechanic is that people should not be trading with the leader, and they should be trading with each other, and that's how they catch up.
It can definitely help, but if you simply don't have the volume of resources to actually do the trading or what people need, then you're not going to be traded with, even if you're against the leader.
Well, actually, now that I think about it, there is one other catch-up mechanic, which is basically the take that aspect of the game, which are all extremely targeted.
Yeah.
So like
the cards.
The cards, yes. So some of the cards are take that, where you target a specific player. And then, of course, there's also the robber. If you're moving the robber, you should probably be going after the leader, which means the leader should find their lands shut down more often than other players' lands. Now, of course, whether or not players do that, they don't always. But if they're thinking strategically, that should balance things out a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember actually moving the robber during our play yesterday.
Oh yeah, because
Like,
we only
from the
rolled
die rolls.
7s before the barbarians.
Yeah, so
came
during
out.
the first
Yeah.
like barbarian invasion, before that time, you cannot actually move the robber.
Yeah.
So like he was just hanging out in the desert with the merchant for the most part.
We did roll a lot of 7s.
We rolled a lot of
Yeah.
7s. I rolled a lot of 7s.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting because probability farming games, I feel like throughout our plays of all of these games, can be actually kind of frustrating. Like,
It absolutely can.
And all games have some level of frustration, but sometimes these ones can feel particularly bad just based on the odds.
I
of
do
the
think we
dice.
rolled 8 more than 7. 8 felt pretty frequent for a
Yeah.
while there.
Yep.
But yeah, like
So-
when you can actually individually pick out a number, like that shouldn't have been rolled that much. But obviously with probabilities, you have no control over what the result is. During one of our other games, I did roll, I think, 3 or 4 6s during that game, or double 6s during that game.
Oh my goodness, you rolled so many 12s. We can talk about that
Yeah.
when we get to that one.
Yeah,
But
we'll
Yeah.
get to that in a couple
it
episodes.
was actually an absurd number of 12s.
It was
Yeah.
absurd.
But
I guess maybe the counterpoint to it is that these games actually flow pretty quickly too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ideally, you're not doing too much on your turn, so that you get more and more chances to gain stuff. Just
yeah.
Well, and hopefully gaining stuff on not your turn, which
Yeah.
is the whole
Yeah.
premise.
That
Yep,
I mean
yep.
that's the big advantage, right? It keeps
Right.
you engaged when it's not your turn, which is interesting because like when you think about keeping people engaged, you might say, well, okay, they need something to do when it's not their turn, like some choice to make, but you don't really need a choice.
Need a present.
Yeah, you can just give them stuff, and that's enough.
Yeah.
That's enough to keep them engaged.
Oh, I get this now. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
great. Okay.
Even though they're not making choices, as long as you give people stuff.
But it is
Yeah.
based off of an original choice of the investment they made.
Yes,
And I think, like,
yes.
being able to reap the benefit, like you were saying before, about passive income.
yeah,
Like, that's a great feeling, just being able to reap what you've sown, basically.
yeah,
yeah, and I think you could keep people engaged too by if the other player's turn is fun to watch.
Right.
And a lot of games it's hard to do that because you're watching in a strategic game. You're just watching someone think or play
Ooh,
with
this
their
is so exciting.
or play with their hidden hands of cards. So
Right.
like maybe that's another takeaway for me. It's just like
Charlie's already at 2. I haven't done any other.
how do you guys jump in anytime on the takeaways, but yeah, the idea that I think there's some prototypes that I've been working on with somebody where we just realized like maybe it's better if the hand is out on the table,
Oh,
so then other
interesting.
people could at least just like watch what
Open-handed.
you're doing. Or I played a prototype. That's what it was. And
Makes-
I was like, oh, this is actually kind of interesting to just watch someone think things through. Because, like, even in Catan, it maybe could work other than the trading aspect. But
well,
You know, like,
that would make
Ananda would
trading
have-
easier
it would actually,
Right,
if,
yeah.
if you
Yeah.
can see what they have.
Yeah. And Ananda had these, like, power turns. But we really weren't able to appreciate them as much as you because it'd be like, I don't know, he has a hand of, like, 10 cards and we'll see what happens.
There was a moment there where your hands are moving in such a flurry that I'm like, I don't even know what's happening. But he's
Yeah.
doing stuff. I'm just going to trust that it's all right.
Yep.
I think one other thing we haven't really talked about Catan, which I guess might be part of my takeaway, is so one thing I've always been impressed with for Catan is aesthetically its use of space is really efficient in that you have this hexagonal board and it uses every part of the geometry. So you use the center of the hex, right? It's conveying information about the terrain type, and the number token is conveying information about the likelihood of rolling. But then it also uses the intersections between the hexes, for the cities and the settlements. And it uses the sides of the hexes for roads. It uses every part of the hex.
And even the external for the ports.
Yeah.
Like, it's really...
Well, in Cities and Knights, I was thinking about that too, because it's like, oh, now the knights can go in that in-between spot where nothing can usually go.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can have knights one space away from a city or settlement, which, you know, is normally a no-no land, but it helps you actually be able to block people a little bit more efficiently.
Yeah. But it's just... Catan is a game... You may have seen these 3D Catan boards.
Oh, yeah.
I remember I printed myself one way back. I don't have it anymore. But Catan is a game that lends itself really, really well to a deluxe 3D edition. And a big part of that is just the efficient use of space, and it looks very, very real.
Like a full game. Like, there's not missing white space, really. It's all...
Yeah, it's very appealing. Yes, that's a good way of putting it. There's no real white space, which means when you have a 3D board with 3D terrain,
right,
it looks like a really cool island.
Oh, yeah.
So there's just something aesthetically about that that's very powerful, I think, and that's my takeaway.
So I will go on to my takeaway, since I have not done a takeaway yet. And mine it's a little bit of a gripe with Catan, and it's one I've developed over, a decade plus of playing the game. There is something about, you are doing a clever investment. You invest in an area that has maybe not a 6 or an 8, but has really solid other numbers around it that aren't 2s or 3s or 11s, 10s. And yet somehow it doesn't yield anything, while maybe a 2 is rolled many, many times. And, like, that is just the nature of 2 dice being rolled together, right? You cannot control that. You can have no real influence over it. And I think Catan has helped me realize, like, being able to manipulate that part a little bit more. And in Cities and Knights, they allow you to do either fixed die, where you can choose what the result will be with one of the cards. Or you can even, I think I saw you can re-roll as well. Maybe I'm imagining that one.
I don't know about re-rolling, but there is a card called the Inventor that lets you move the numbers around.
Yeah, being able to manipulate which probability is on your spot. And so I actually used that one. And I thought that was a really good use of that space and still being able to use the same system. My takeaway is you do need to have some kind of system in place to allow players some agency if their investment isn't panning out the way they thought it would. Mm-hmm. Just being able to create something that they can grab onto and a new strategy to switch mid-game.
The aqueduct also helps with that. I mean, you have to get to level 3 in the science track.
Right.
But
it's a lot of paper.
Yeah, but the aqueduct gives you a resource every time you don't roll a resource naturally. So
I would have been rich.
Yeah. Like, in the base Catan game, there is sort of an incentive to spread out number-wise to cover as many different numbers as possible. But once you have the aqueduct in Cities and Knights, it can be good to use inventors or whatever to try to sort of homogenize. Or no, is that the right?
Yeah, get them all in the same number.
Yeah. So that you have some turns where you just get a ton of stuff, and otherwise you're getting a trickle of things
of whatever you need.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great fix to it. I just wish it could be more accessible if you don't have a forest with a city on it.
I mean, maybe that's a reason to put your starting city on a forest.
As we learned the hard way, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Some people would have.
Exactly, yeah.
So, Trevor, would you be a fan of... I know I've heard that some people use a deck instead of dice. A deck with the exact odds of...
No, I would not be a fan of that. Unfortunately, I would love for that to be the case, but there is something about dice rolling that is just so satisfying.
Yeah.
Like...
And knowing that, the 12 is only going to come up 1 out of, is it 64 or
36.
32?
It's 36.
36
1 out of 36.
Yeah. Right. That's a long time to wait, potentially.
Or you could roll 2 or 3 of them in a row.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
It's not probable, but it can happen.
So, any other last thoughts on Catan? Anything we can learn from the design?
I mean, it's a classic game. I think we've talked a little bit about side effects before, and I always love pointing to Catan as an example of a game that does side effects really, really well.
As in, you get whatever action you do, you're going to get something.
Everything you
from
do has interesting side effects, right? Like you build settlements, and that changes where other people can build, and it gives you points, and you build roads, and suddenly you're competing for the longest road. And now with knights, you're also affecting where your knights can go. You move the robber, and you sort of change the economy right there.
Mm-hmm.
The game is just jam-packed with really elegant side effects in every action that you take.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we'll call it a wrap on Catan, and tune in next week for Machikoro.
Hey, thanks for listening to The Tabletop Takeaway. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. So please tell your friends and visit our website at thetabletoptakeaway.com, where you can suggest games and mechanics for us to cover next on the show.